In the icy void near Saturn's rings, a desperate convoy of Vornak refugees clings to survival. Hunted by the merciless Klytheran purge, Commander Zether's plea for help echoes unanswered. Captain Kade and the Intrepid defy the odds, igniting a war for humanity's soul. Dive into this epic tale of courage and defiance. Keep reading. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more captivating videos, and to inspire us to create even more amazing content. The vacuum of space was still, as cold and unforgiving as death itself. Near Saturn's icy rings, a convoy of Vornak refugees drifted aimlessly, an assembly of battered, makeshift ships strung together like a fragile thread of survival. The convoy, once a proud fleet, now resembled nothing more than a floating scrapyard. Hulls were scorched, engines sputtered, and the air was thick with despair. Among them, the Vornak exile, the lead ship, seemed to be the last defiant pulse of a dying race. Inside the command deck, Commander Zether, a towering figure with jagged horns and cracked, battle-worn armor, stared at the communications screen. His eyes, once filled with the fire of leadership, now burned with a hollow fury. His people, the Silther, the Bracker, the Zenari, civilizations so diverse, so ancient, had been forced to flee from their homes, fleeing from the Klytheran purge. He hit a button on his console, his voice cracking as he transmitted a desperate distress call to any who might listen. His fingers trembled as he typed, "This is Commander Zether of the Vornak exile. We are under attack. Please. We need help. Anyone, please." The transmission echoed through the empty void of space, a cry for mercy in a galaxy filled with war. Light years away, Captain Darius Kade of the Intrepid sat in the ship's command center, weary eyes scanning the tactical data on the screen. He was a man forged in war, scarred by the flames of 1,000 battles. The distress call hit him like a punch to the gut. He had seen this kind of devastation before. He knew what would happen if he did nothing. Set course for the Vornak convoy. Now, Kade barked, his voice hard, filled with resolve. EarthGov had declared neutrality, but Kade had already made up his mind. 1,000 voices cried out in terror. Humanity wasn't going to ignore them. He slammed his fist onto the command console, prepared to break calm silence. "We're going in." The crew moved in perfect synchronization. The Intrepid, an aging but heavily modified warship, was Earth's last line of defense in a galaxy that had forgotten the human will to fight. Weapon systems came online with a low hum, and the ship lurched forward, its engines kicking into overdrive. Plasma shields flared bright blue, lighting up the darkness as the Intrepid made its way toward the Vornak's burning ships. The odds were overwhelming. Klytheran warships were merciless and heavily armed. But Kade wasn't concerned with odds. He had his crew. He had their courage. And that, above all, was something no alien force could ever calculate. The black void of space was alive with a flash of violence. Vornak ships, some barely holding together, were being torn apart by the precise, ruthless Klytheran assault. Their warships, sleek and deadly, fired volley after volley of plasma that tore through Vornak hulls with brutal efficiency. A massive Klytheran dreadnought, the Vrax's nemesis, hovered just behind the melee, launching wave after wave of devastating attacks. Its weapons, capable of generating 500 megaton plasma bursts, disintegrated Vornak shields with ease, sending entire sections of ships into fireballs. Commander Zether, watching helplessly from the Vornak exile, clutched the control console, his knuckles white with tension. His people were being slaughtered. He could hear the screams through the comms, families, children, elderly, each one a life being extinguished under the unforgiving assault. "We can't hold out much longer," Zether muttered to his communications officer, his voice hoarse from the weight of command. "We need help now. Not tomorrow, now." But help wasn't coming, not for them. The Klytherans didn't negotiate. They didn't ask questions. They exterminated. Zether's mind raced as his fleet's shields flickered and failed one by one. The Vornak ships were outmatched in every way, their technology outdated, Their ships pieced together from salvage parts after the first wave of the Klytheran purge. The Intrepid had just entered the fray. A loud crash of metal against metal reverberated through the command deck as the human ship's shields absorbed the first Klytheran blast. The Intrepid shuddered, but her hull held firm. The human-made ship wasn't perfect, but it was sturdy, and it had one thing the Klytherans hadn't accounted for: the sheer will of her captain. "Engage evasive pattern Delta 7, Kade ordered. The crew moved quickly, the Intrepid's engines flaring as it darted in and out of the incoming fire. Its plasma shields absorbed hits, but the ship's hull had been reinforced with rare alloys, allowing it to withstand far more than most vessels of its age. "Redirect power to forward batteries," Kade barked, his voice sharp. The weapon systems hummed to life. The Intrepid's heavy pulse cannons locking onto the Klytheran fleet. "Lock torpedo tubes. Target the dreadnought's weak points." Now, a series of deafening blasts rocked the ship, but the Intrepid retaliated, for torpedoes shot from its launchers, streaking through space and slamming into the Vrax's nemesis's exposed flank. The resulting explosion shook the void. "Direct hit, sir," cried the weapons officer, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of fire and chaos. Captain Kade grinned, his voice low, like a growl of defiance. "They're not getting away that easy." The Intrepid pressed forward, ignoring the damage and the odds stacked against them. The tide of the battle was far from over, but the humans had shown something the Klytherans hadn't expected. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for something greater. The refugees, hidden behind the wreckage, had a glimmer of hope, a sliver of humanity's indomitable spirit piercing through the chaos. The Klytherans had underestimated what a determined human could do when backed into a corner. The battle raged on, a storm of light and sound in the vacuum of space. The Intrepid tore through the battlefield, a defiant streak of humanity's resilience against the Klytheran onslaught. Kade's orders came quickly and decisively, each command cutting through the chaos like a knife. Every second counted, and the ship's crew, seasoned, loyal, and relentless, responded with military precision. "Shields holding at 30 Fintram," shouted Lieutenant Kira from her station, sweat slicking her brow as she monitored the damage. The Intrepid was a relic, an old warship of Earth's first interstellar fleet. But its age didn't make it weak. It made it dangerous. Powered by a hybrid fusion engine capable of propelling the ship at 0.8 light-years per day, the Intrepid was designed for endurance. And that's exactly what it needed now. "We need to push through. Get closer to the convoy," Kade shouted, his voice hoarse but commanding. "Target lock," the weapons officer, Lieutenant Corbin, called out, his fingers dancing across the console as he adjusted the ship's cannons. Firing torpedoes. The ship's massive pulse cannons roared, sending 3 torpedoes streaking toward the nearest Klytheran destroyer. The weapons impacted with stunning force, each torpedo carrying a payload of 10 kilotons of plasma. The Klytheran ship buckled under the strike, its shields flickering before they collapsed. The explosion lit up the darkness of space, sending debris flying in all directions. Humanity's firepower, though far from the Klytherans' advanced weaponry, carried a brutal force. Kade's mind was focused entirely on the mission. The refugees were only moments from annihilation, and the Intrepid was their only hope. Back on Earth, Chancellor Lena Varkas watched the live feed from a secure command center in Geneva. Her fist slammed onto the table, her mind racing. The raw footage from the Vornak ships showed images of burning wreckage. Children clinging to their mothers, their faces filled with terror. The image was undeniable. Humanity couldn't sit idly by while innocents were slaughtered. "We will not stand idle," Varkas declared in front of a global audience, her voice a fierce, unwavering rallying cry. "Humanity will act." In the following minutes, a surge of reinforcements arrived. 3 ships, captained by Rhea Jax, Torin Blaze, and Elias Thorne. These were no official military ships. They were rogue captains, mercenaries who had fought for years alongside Kade's crew, forming an alliance out of necessity. The Fury, the Vanguard, and the Defiant were rugged vessels, cobbled together from surplus military tech and scrap from orbital shipyards. But they packed a punch. The Intrepid broke off from its formation and maneuvered sharply, flanking the Klytherans. As the rogue ships arrived, the human fleet, ragtag and resourceful, unleashed hell on the enemy. Kade's voice rang through the comms, full of fire. This is how we fight. This is what humanity stands for, against the odds. For them. As the enemy forces scrambled to adjust to this sudden influx of fighters, Kade's heart surged. He could feel the shift. The tide was turning. Humanity had thrown down the gauntlet, and now they would make the Klytherans regret their underestimation. Fire everything we've got. We're not stopping until every last one of them is gone, Kade roared. The human ships attacked with unrelenting force, using their speed and unpredictability to outmaneuver the far more precise Klytherans. The Intrepid and its newfound allies hammered at the Klytheran fleet, their weapon systems, modified for power, not efficiency, ripping through shields, tearing apart enemy ships. A glimmer of hope surged through the Vornak refugees. They could hear the distant rumble of the human ships cutting through the enemy, their blinding bursts of plasma lighting the heavens. Zethar, watching from his command center, felt something he hadn't in days. Hope. He could see the Klytherans faltering. The cold, calculated invaders were being overwhelmed by the raw, reckless fury of humanity. We're not finished yet, Zethar muttered, rallying his remaining crew. The humans have given us a chance. Now, we fight. Humanity's presence was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was a roar, shaking the galaxy. And the Klytherans were beginning to learn that when humans decide to fight, they fight to win. The Intrepid shuddered under the weight of another Klytheran barrage. Plasma fire streaked across the void, burning through the edges of the ship's shields. Shields at 12 Fentrum. Captain, Lieutenant Kira shouted, her voice tight with urgency. The ship's defenses were faltering, the ferocity of the Klytheran attack threatening to overwhelm them. Kade's jaw clenched, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was the rock at the center of this storm, his crew hanging on every word. He knew they couldn't keep up this pace much longer. The Intrepid's hull was strong, reinforced with alloys that could withstand hits up to 10 gigajoules per square meter. But even that wouldn't last forever. We need backup, Kade muttered, his voice steady despite the chaos. Initiate the emergency signal. Break calm silence. Now, Lieutenant Corbin punched in the sequence, and within moments, the encrypted signal reached its intended destination, an underground channel, long abandoned by official military protocols. It was humanity's last line of defense, a network of rogue captains, independent of EarthGov but loyal to the cause. The response was swift. Moments later, 3 ships arrived, cutting through the blackness like a blade through flesh. The Fury, the Vanguard, and the Defiant, each a masterpiece of salvage technology, each with a reputation for brutal, unrelenting warfare. Captain Rhea Jax's voice crackled over the comms, dripping with defiance. Captain Jax through comms. I hope you haven't gotten too comfortable, Kade. We're here to give you a hand. The Intrepid's crew exhaled collectively. The cavalry had arrived. The 3 ships immediately took up flanking positions, opening fire with their full complement of weapons. The Klytherans, taken off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to regroup. The Intrepid darted in, its cannons flashing with deadly accuracy. Each shot sent shockwaves across the enemy fleet. The Vanguard's railguns unleashed devastating bursts of kinetic energy, while the Defiance torpedo tubes, modified to launch heavy, 15-ton warheads, slammed into the enemy with destructive force. Kade grinned, adrenaline coursing through his veins. For humanity, he said softly to himself. The fight was far from over, but humanity's spirit was undeniable, and it was going to win this day. The battle outside was an inferno. The Intrepid veered through a storm of plasma fire, its shields flickering dangerously, holding at just 7 Fentrum. Each impact made the ship groan, the hull warping under the strain. Kade's knuckles were white on the control panel, his gaze unflinching as the tactical display showed the grim truth. Time was running out. The Vornak convoy was now surrounded. Every passing minute brought them closer to extinction. Kade's jaw tightened. There was only one way to end this. Commander Zephyr, Kade said, his voice steady, you need to pull your ships back. Head to Saturn's rings. Use the debris as cover. We'll hold off the Klytherans. Zethyr's voice came through the comms, raw with exhaustion, but laced with a reluctant understanding. Understood, Captain Kade. We will try to make it, if only to buy you time. That was the last thing the Vornak could do. Survive you just a little longer. Kade glanced at his crew, gritty, battle-hardened men and women who had seen too much death, too much carnage, and yet they followed him without question. Every soul on board the Intrepid knew what needed to be done. The Klytheran dreadnought, the Vrax's nemesis, loomed ahead like a malevolent specter. Its enormous hull radiated with a pulsating red energy that lit up the dark void of space. It was the heart of the Klytheran fleet. This ship controlled the containment field keeping the Vornak refugees trapped. Destroy it, and their whole war effort would collapse. But doing so would mean certain death for the Intrepid. Target the Vrax's nemesis, Kade ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. We're going in. Lieutenant Kira's eyes widened in shock. Captain, I know, Kade interrupted, his voice unwavering. But it's the only way to win this. We're going to make it count. The Intrepid angled toward the Klytheran ship, entering a death trap of energy beams and missiles. The ship's weapons, capable of firing 150 terajoules per shot, lit up the dark expanse. But Kade's eyes narrowed. The Intrepid was smaller, nimbler. They could outmaneuver the Klytherans, even in a field of doom. Evasive maneuvers, pattern Fate 9, Kade barked. The Intrepid spun sharply, banking left then right, narrowly dodging plasma shots that tore through the space where the ship had been a second before. The crew worked in flawless synchronization, each member anticipating the next move. Lock torpedo tubes, Kade word. The massive weapon systems hummed to life, each torpedo brimming with enough firepower to level a city. All power to forward shields. Brace for impact. The Intrepid accelerated, its engines roaring as it made its way toward the Klytheran command ship. Its engines now pushing beyond their safe limits at 120 infantry capacity. The ship's hull groaned with a strain, but it held firm. Kade gritted his teeth. The ship was taking a beating, but they had no choice. It was this or nothing. Now, Kade muttered to himself. For them. The Intrepid surged forward, launching its torpedoes in a final, reckless assault. The Klytheran dreadnought's shields flickered in panic, but it was too late, for torpedoes slammed into the Vrax's nemesis's exposed flank, erupting into a blinding explosion of energy. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The Intrepid shuddered violently as the shockwave reverberated through space. The Klytheran command ship was engulfed in flames, its massive hull splitting apart in a violent cascade of destruction. The entire Klytheran fleet reeled in shock as their command structure crumbled. But for Kade and his crew, the battle was far from over. The Intrepid had done its part, but there were still dozens of Klytheran ships to deal with. Now we fight, Kade muttered grimly, his face set. The war was about to change, and humanity was at the center of it. The vacuum of space trembled with the aftermath of the explosion that had torn the Vrax's nemesis apart. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, disorienting the Klytheran fleet, their once imposing precision faltering in the face of humanity's unrelenting fury. The Intrepid, though battered and bloodied, pushed forward, its engines roaring at full thrust. Its hull, scarred from the constant barrage, glowed a deep red from the strain of its plasma shields absorbing hit after hit. Direct hit on the dreadnought's core, Captain, Lieutenant Corbin reported, his voice shaky but triumphant. The Vrax's nemesis is gone. The crew of the Intrepid let out a collective cheer, but Kade remained focused. The battle wasn't over. The Klytheran still had superior numbers and firepower, with over 60 warships left in their fleet. But humanity had thrown the first punch, and the Klytherans were still reeling from it. We can't let up, Kade muttered, his gaze locked on the tactical display. The Vornak exile and the remaining refugees had managed to escape to Saturn's icy rings, seeking cover among the debris. But time was running out. The Klytherans would regroup and return with a vengeance if they weren't crushed now. Kade's eyes flicked to the incoming fleet of human reinforcements, 3 ships, each led by rogue captains with a long history of brutal warfare. Captain Jax's Fury, Captain Blaze's Vanguard, and Captain Thorn's Defiant. All ships cobbled together from discarded military tech and salvaged scraps, but each one armed to the teeth. "We've got incoming," First Officer Garen warned. Klytheran battle group deploying another wave of cruisers. Kade's lips curled into a grim smile. "Let's show them how humans fight when backed into a corner." The Intrepid's weapon systems powered up, its pulse cannons humming to life. The ship's railguns, modified to fire 12-ton projectiles at speeds exceeding 10 kilometers per second, fired with brutal precision. The first Klytheran cruiser erupted in flames as its shields were pierced. The second cruiser didn't even get the chance to retaliate before a salvo of torpedoes from the Defiant obliterated it. The tide had shifted. Humanity was no longer reacting to the Klytherans. They were driving the fight. The Klytheran fleet, once so confident in its superiority, was beginning to break apart. "We've got them on the ropes," Kade said, his voice cold with determination. "Keep the pressure on." The enemy ships, now scattered and disorganized, tried to regroup, but it was too late. The Klytheran Empire was crumbling, and the human fleet was the force that had shattered it. The silence that followed the chaos was deafening. The battle had ended, but the cost of victory was everywhere. The Intrepid, battered and smoking, limped through space, its once pristine hull now marked with the scars of war. The ship's engines hummed weakly, strained far beyond their limit as they glided past the scattered remains of the Klytheran fleet. Exploded cruisers drifted in pieces, their once mighty forms now nothing more than wreckage. Inside the Intrepid, the mood was somber. The crew had won, but the victory had come at a brutal price. Lieutenant Kira's voice cut through the stillness of the bridge. "Damage report, Captain," she said, her eyes scanning the console. "Shields are offline. Hull integrity is down to 40 defentrum. We've lost 2 engines and half of our secondary weapon systems." Kade nodded, his face expressionless. He didn't need the report to know the gravity of the situation. The ship was barely holding together, its once mighty frame now a shadow of its former self. But the refugees, thousands of Vornak, were safe. That was all that mattered. "Get the medbay ready," Kade ordered, his voice hoarse. "We've got casualties coming in." His thoughts drifted briefly to Zethar and the Vornak convoy, now safely hidden among Saturn's rings. The Klytherans had been defeated, but the victory wasn't a clean one. The Intrepid and her crew had taken on the full weight of the Klytheran fury, and now they would need time to heal. On Earth, Chancellor Lena Varkas stood in a war room, watching the aftermath unfold in real time. Her fists clenched as the final images of the battle came through. Victory was bittersweet. Humanity had won, but the costs were steep. "Humanity is back," Varkas said quietly, her voice steady. "And this time, we're not backing down." The universe would remember the day humanity stood tall,